Good morning. I thought we would spend our breakfast with Ted Turner and ask you a few questions, Ted. And I think last night, we really enjoyed hearing from Sam Nunn. And I wanted to get a sense of why you chose this particular issue of the nuclear danger.
To put a separate initiative against, it seemed the more I have gotten into philanthropy, obviously, the more I've learned. I knew a fair amount because of my involvement with CNN on the global issues, and I had extensive travel experience all over the world, not only just trying to market CNN and around the world, but also before that as a sportsman racing in mostly Western countries around the world. So I had a very, very good global background, not just reading about it, sitting in a chair here in the United States, but actually I think I've been in over 60 countries. And by doing that, I learned a lot, and I learned to feel very comfortable out there in the world. I feel very, very comfortable out there. I was never worried about anything bad happening, and I made friends everywhere that I went. I tried to make friends, so I was not out there like the current administration trying to make enemies everywhere. I was trying to make friends. I think, particularly if you're in business, everybody's a potential customer for CNN, so I looked at people as potential customers, you don't want to bomb your customers. I mean, that doesn't make good sense. So you want your customers to do well so they can buy more from you, but then when I got into the really critical issues, and I realized that governments were responsible for weapons, like nuclear weapons, chemical and biological weapons. But then I looked at the governments kind of scared me a little bit. Our government, all the governments scare me. I mean, because there's usually just one government, to a country. So they're monopolies, and monopolies tend to not get much done. I mean, they don't have to. The government doesn't have to worry whether it's going to be replaced. Usually, I mean, the French Revolution was a notable exception. There are occasional revolutions, but usually governments are pretty stable. Not always. I mean, you've got a lot of failed states in the world now, unfortunately. And clearly, I was just appalled by the fact that the Cold War had been over when we started the Nuclear Threat Initiative close to 5 years ago. It had been over 10 years. And I always assumed as soon as the Cold War was over that the Russian leadership and the American leadership would get together and agree on nuclear disarmament, because it was so clear that we had just barely escaped annihilation during the Cuban Missile Crisis, during the Berlin crisis, the airlift. And since the governments weren't doing anything about it, the thought occurred to me that we should give it a try, and I contacted Sam Nunn, who was the biggest expert in the field that was then available to partner with, and he agreed. And having been in government for many years and head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, he knew all about it. He thought we should get rid of the nuclear weapons too, or at least get them off hair trigger alert. I still believe that we could rid the world of nuclear weapons, and that's the only really safe way to do things. How can we talk to the Iranians? How can we tell the Iranians they can't have nuclear weapons? They're a sovereign state, that they can't have them, but it's okay for us to have them. And then we go to India and say it's okay now for India to have them. And it's okay for Israel to have them, but not for any of the Arab countries to have them. And it's okay for us to have thousands of them, but nobody else better build a single one. I mean, it's hypocritical, and it's ridiculous. If I was Iranian, I'd be mad too, God damn it, if you have 20,000 nuclear weapons, I'm going to have a dozen. And if you want to bomb me, go ahead. You know, I mean, and I'm just sick of bombing. I think you don't convince anybody over to your way of thinking by bombing them. You know, it's a very wasteful thing. You remember when we went into Iraq, first we bombed Iraq. And then we came back over and said, well, we're going to rebuild everything we bombed. So we had to pay for it twice. Billions of dollars to bomb it, and then billions of dollars to build it back. And now the Iraqis are all screwed up, and they're bombing their own things. You know, bombing is not the way to do things in a modern, civilized, well-educated world. I mean, it's just time to... I'm sick of bombs. You know, I mean, and the ridiculous thing about it is there is a big movement to ban landmines. The United States, of course, doesn't agree and doesn't go along with it. We don't go along with anything in a multinational setting, or hardly anything. We don't even, it's amazing that we agree what time it is. You know, it's...
Well, let me interrupt
yeah,
you for
I know,
a
I
moment.
kind of... Can I answer the question? We did it because nobody else was doing it. Nobody. There was nobody but governments. And let me tell you something. Well, you've seen how governments have done with the nuclear weapons, and there's more and more of them all the time. More countries with nuclear weapons. We're not making any progress hardly at all towards nuclear disarmament.
You spoke about a multilateral setting, and you have also decided to support all UN causes, including the eradication of polio, the eradication of HIV/AIDS. Tell us a little bit about your decision-making that made you take on these large issues as well.
Well, you know, we wanted to be of benefit to the world. I mean, the whole idea of philanthropy is to make things better for other people that don't have the advantages you have as far as financial ability and education and so forth. What we want to do, if we're ever going to have peace in this world, we have to have a world that's reasonably equitable. You can't have a world where 10% of the people have 90% of the wealth. That's not a stable situation. It won't last forever. Eventually you'll have revolutions in those kind of settings, or 2% of the people have 95% of the wealth. I mean, and the wealth is concentrating. People are making money so much faster than they ever did before because business is moving more quickly. At least some businesses are, like the technology businesses are moving so fast that somebody who had almost nothing one year can be a billionaire the next year and have 10 billion 5 years later. You know, the Silicon Valley guys. And also, I learned I had nothing, and then all of a sudden everything started working, and then I was worth billions, and then I lost it all, or not all, thank God, but I lost most of it, and it impacted my ability. I think I lost more than any individual ever in history. I lost about 6 to 8 billion, depending on what time of day it was, that the ship started to go down. But at least I gave away over half of it while I had it. I would have lost it anyway if I hadn't done that. So, you know, my recommendation is to those of you who are thinking about increasing your giving, I would do it while you have it. Because at least then you get in the record books, you know. What would be worse than, you know, saying, well, he had it, then he lost it, and he never did anything with it, you know. He didn't even, you know, and I had yachts at one point in my life. I'm not really fascinated with the idea of having a 550-foot yacht like Larry Ellison does. An ocean liner with over 100 crewmen to just take care of him and his handful of friends, I guess. Probably got some fair weather friends. He'd have more friends if he had gotten into philanthropy in a bigger way.
Now, I'm wondering whether you were as surprised as the rest of us at the moment that you stood up to that microphone and pledged $1 billion to the United Nations.
Well, I'd only thought of it 3 days before.
3 days of planning.
But, you know, when you make a decision, then you should move quickly.
But what I'm told is that your initial scheme, because you were concerned about the U.S. not paying its arrears,
right.
Your initial scheme was to give the money, to pay the dues, and then turn around and sue the Congress.
The first thing I looked at was buying the debt from the UN at a discount, and then presenting it to the United States government for its full face amount. And see, the UN couldn't sue the United States because it just wouldn't look good, and they wanted to have good relations. But I could threaten to sue the U.S. government if they didn't pay, because it was legitimate debts that had been agreed to. But I found out that that would not work, because governments, you can't sue the United States government, at least not for past dues to the United Nations. So that scheme didn't work. I thought of a number of different schemes. I'm a big supporter of the UN. I always have been since World War II. When I was 6 years old, when the UN first came into existence, and I've always thought it was a absolutely necessary institution that we had to have, because there are some things that you have to have, all the countries have to work together on, like protecting the Arctic, the Antarctic, the oceans, the atmosphere. There are things that individual countries can't do by themselves, and it's just too bad that this current administration doesn't understand that. You know, they think that the United States can do everything, I guess, and here we are.
Well, one of the things that you've done is use the technique of partnerships in order to achieve your goals.
Sure, that's right. You can't do it by yourself. It takes, there's an old saying, many hands make light work. You know, I mean, the pyramids weren't built by one person. They were built by thousands of people working hard, pulling those rocks with those ropes, like in those old Egyptian movies.
Can you give us an example of some of those thousands of people and rocks? I mean, what are the partnerships that you...
Well, they built the Great Wall, too.
What are the partnerships that you're most proud of, that you think are working best?
Well, first of all, we've partnered with the United Nations, and I think that we're proudest of that. And we've partnered with Rotary and the World Health Organization. We partnered with dozens, if not hundreds, of different foundations. We've partnered with all of the major foundations in one project or another. Veterans groups, we partnered with in the landmine, trying to rid the world of landmines. Wouldn't it be something that we get rid of landmines, but we don't get rid of nuclear weapons? I mean, come on, you get rid of all of them. You don't. I mean, landmines can blow the legs off a kid on his way home from school, but nuclear weapons can blow the heads off everybody. And you know, we need to expand our horizon a little. But that partners with. You can't do anything really big in this world without a whole lot of people joining in.
You've also entered into partnerships with some private sector actors like Nike and others. Has that worked well for you?
Corporations, individuals, foundations, countries. We've been partners with the United States and Russia. Sam Nunn told you about getting rid of the Yugoslavia nuclear highly enriched uranium. That was a partnership of us and paying the UN dues. I mean, I partnered with the United States. They put up the $1 billion, and I put up $32 million to pay our arrears. I wrote a personal check for it, and that was it made me feel good, because the U.S. couldn't do it without my help. You know, it's I helped bail my country out. You know, and how many chances does somebody have in a lifetime to do that? I can't think of anybody that ever did anything on that scale before. No. And I wasn't really rich, you know. Compared to Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, I was just, you know, too bitter, you know. I flew tourists on the airplanes when others were flying around in private jets.
Now, speaking
I got one now.
Well, speaking of jets, what are you up to with Richard Branson?
Well, Richard, Richard, we've partnered with Richard in the Energy Future Coalition. That's our initiative that was jump-started by the Turner Foundation and the UN Foundation working together to encourage clean, renewable, locally produced energy to deal with the environmental threat, the threat to our national security, and the threat to our economic stability.
And would you put?
And Branson's in there with us big time, and he's going to see if he can fly his 100 airplanes with ethanol. I don't know whether that'll work or not, but it certainly will work in automobiles, trucks.
Do you put climate change right up there with the nuclear
Absolutely.
danger?
But right up there with it. But the nuclear disarmament I put first, because with nuclear, if something goes wrong with the nuclear arsenals and Russia and the United States fire them at each other, it's the end of life on Earth. Not just humanity, but maybe a few cockroaches will survive, but, yuck. But we can end the human experiment in an afternoon with nuclear weapons. It might take 30 or 40 years with global warming. So we have a little bit more time, but they're both absolutely essential that we deal with them. Then the longer we wait to do so, particularly with global climate change, the greater peril that we risk.
Now, what I've noticed you've done, at least both in the case of the UN Foundation and the case of the Nuclear Threat Initiative, is you've selected two former senators who really know the policy sphere.
Right.
Why did you make that choice?
Because I thought they were the best men for the job.
Yeah, but sounds like your criteria though is to make sure it was folks who knew how to maneuver in that arena.
Well, they both had done a good job of being socially responsible. There are some people in politics, like DeLay. DeLay was a very effective politician. I mean, he's resigning. It was the front page of the Washington Post this morning. And he's leaving because he just got, he was not the best kind of politician, in my opinion. I would not have hired him to do one of these two jobs. Now, if I wanted somebody to smuggle something in the United States or something like that, I'd give him some consideration.
So he's not getting an offer in the morning?
No, not for me.
Well, speaking of being above the political fray,
well, there are good politicians and bad ones, just like there's good in everything and probably some bad in everything, too.
But Sam Nunn is particularly known in the national security sphere for being able to rise above partisanship.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's what he's known for. He can reach across party lines. How important is doing that to try to achieve your goals?
It's very important. I mean, we're not going to win the global warming battle, and we're not going to have nuclear disarmament. We're not going to win these big issues with a 51% majority. We're going to have 75 or 80% of the people on board. For instance, just dealing with trash, and I deal with trash because I don't like it, and it bothers me to live in a trashy world. So when I walk around the block like I did this morning, I pick up trash and put it in the wastebasket. Even I do. And I try and do it when people are looking. And if Ted Turner's picking up trash, maybe, duh, I should too. Okay. But I've come to the conclusion you have to have almost 100% of the people willing not to throw trash out the window of their car. Otherwise, if only 10% of the people are throwing trash down, the other 90% of us got to pick the goddamn stuff up. And I'm sick of picking up other people's trash. And I'm sick of, goddamn it, I didn't build any nuclear weapons. Why do I have to be responsible for getting rid of them? But then I looked in the mirror when I was shaving and said, well, if you don't do it, who's going to? That nobody else is doing it. So you better do it. I care about my children. I care about my grandchildren. I care about your grandchildren. You know, I think, you know, we're pretty good. You know, I'd like to see people, wouldn't it be nice to think that people will still be here 1,000 years from now or 10,000 years from now, living in a paradise on earth because we've learned to stabilize our population. We've learned to live with our environment and not, that we basically are doing everything right instead of 2/3 of the things wrong like we're doing now. The whole trick is, let's just divide the situation up into thirds. 25, 30 years ago, we were doing everything wrong. Now we're doing about 1/3 of the things right. In the next 10 years, we had better get another third right, okay? And then we got 20 or 30, 40 years to get the other third right, you know, and then we're doing everything right instead of everything wrong. In a 100-year, we could go from slavery, war, nuclear weapons, prejudice, racism, overpopulation, environmental destruction. We could go from that to living on a paradise here on earth. And if we do it, it's going to be people like you and me that were the ones that led, that came to this meeting and said, what can I do? What can I do in my life with my money and my efforts to make this a sustainable world? I want humanity to be here 1,000 years from now. I want my grandchildren to see their grandchildren grow up in a safe, secure, environmentally sound environment. And we can do it. But boy, it's going to take a lot of work, and we've got to get moving. I mean, that's this administration, we've lost 8 years. If Al Gore had been president of the United States 6 years ago, we'd be living in a different world than we are today. We wouldn't maybe have our backs quite so close up against the wall. But in order for this to happen, we're going to have to have all the major political parties on board. I think what we need is a movement called the SMART movement, where we start doing everything smart, and you could be a Republican or a Democrat and subscribe to the SMART movement because you're for the environment, you're for population stabilization, you're for arms reduction, so forth. The smart things, and then we got to stop doing the dumb things. If we do that, we're okay.
You now have 528 members of the SMART movement here for you. Now, you've been quoted as saying, I'm going to give until it feels good. Is that your advice to those here?
Yeah, it's better than give until it hurts.
I just have one final question. You had you've been philanthropic all your life. It wasn't just that moment when you pledged that billion.
But I got asked all the time, you know, what has given you more satisfaction and pleasure in your life, making the money or giving it away? I said, well, let me answer it this way. You have to make it before you have the opportunity to give it away.
Well, one of the ways in which you gave it away was the Goodwill Games.
Right.
You created the Goodwill Games, and if I remember correctly,
which Time Warner immediately canceled after we merged.
Back to Time
They
Warner.
They didn't want to spend the 30 to 40 million bucks. It was, you know, that's not a lot of money, really. You can pay that much for one outfielder with the New York Yankees.
When when you first initiated the Goodwill Games, you were traveling in St. Petersburg, and a guy named Putin was your minder. And he
was vice mayor of St. Petersburg.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering how you interact with your minder.
Well, I didn't know that he was going to be president, but I'm nice to everybody, and that's good because be nice to everybody because you never know when your driver's going to become president.
Well, Ted Turner, thank you very much for starting off our day.